All right. Yeah, so today we'll be discussing static web apps here, Azure Static Web Apps, and we'll talk about getting started with, we'll be actually using Blazor WebAssembly project here and end up publishing that to Azure Static Web Apps and Visual Studio. And I'll be doing that part of the demo, and Matt Hernandez will be taking up from there and showing you how to get a CI/CD flow for Azure Static Web Apps using the Azure portal. And then I believe if we have time, Matt might talk about some backend options there and also some time for Q&A. So yeah.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Matt Hernandez. I'm a product manager on the Azure Static Web Apps team. And uh, yeah, as I had said, we're going to go through some of these items here. We're going to start with why you might want to choose static web apps, especially for Blazor front ends, but just in general, TypeScript, JavaScript, Python, all of that stuff is going to be supported on the back end. That'll make more sense as I get further along. If you take away one thing from this whole presentation, it's that static web apps is a complete solution for modern web apps. By default, you're going to get a globally distributed front end. You're going to get API integrations such as our serverless functions, the app service paths, or even container apps for our containers as a service option. You have data API generation. All of that stuff is just kind of built into the product. Authentication provider integration, so GitHub auth, Twitter auth. Think we actually got rid of Facebook, but GitHub and Twitter are going to be the big ones in there. Customizable authorization. So if you drop just a JSON config file in there, you can say what level of auth is required to access certain routes. And best practices by default. That's something that I'll go into a little bit later, but you're going to get CI/CD out of the box. And the other big thing, which is honestly one of my favorite things, is the generated staging environments. Okay, so I promise this is like the only slide that I have that is like full of text. The rest is just going to be graphics. So what all of this means in practice is you may have built something that looks similar to this model here, where you have your static content is stored in like a blob storage container. You either FTP that in or you use some sort of custom CI/CD that you've written with GitHub Actions or whatever. You front that with Azure Front Door for your CDN to make sure that that front end is globally available. And then you have your API routing through API management to your various regions on the back end. Now, in this case, what I've always done is app service web apps that are essentially just wrappers for the database. That's our data API. And then for authentication, we bring in Azure Active Directory, and that we use that manually to set up authentication and authorization. Now, when it comes to static web apps, all of that stuff is just built right into the product. I know that sounds like a lot, but I promise you, it is built into the product. All of these pieces just kind of come right out of the box. You can, as soon as you deploy, you can hit .auth/login/GitHub, and suddenly you're logging in with GitHub. The database piece, you just connect a database and we will create an API for you on the back end. Now, as I said before, it's not just your front end. We have direct integration with functions. So you can actually have your front end and your serverless backend in the same repo and hook that up to automatically build and deploy just immediately. But you can also do what we call bring your own API. So if you have like an existing ASP.NET backend hosted on app service, either Windows or Linux, doesn't matter, you can connect that to your static web app front end. Same thing with container apps. If you have a backend running over in container apps, just link it in. It's just a handful of clicks and you're good to go. And the other thing that I didn't point out that I would like to point out is that we do have a very generous free tier. There are a handful of features that you have to pay up to our production level tier. The biggest of which, honestly, is the SLA, the 4.9 SLA. But yes, and then I am going to hand it off to Syed for the first demo.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt. So here we are in Visual Studio, and we're gonna for when building a static web app, the project type that we have for that scenario is a Blazor WebAssembly project. And we can create that in the new project dialog here, Blazor WebAssembly app. We can go through this. And then after we go through this process, it'll create us a Blazor WebAssembly project. And with Blazor WebAssembly, you can still write C#, but everything actually gets compiled into a WebAssembly file. And then that will go down to the client. So all the files on the server are static, and there's no need for a backend actually running there. All right, I'm going to switch over to an existing Blazor WebAssembly project that I have here. Let me go ahead and run this with start without debugging. We could also do Control F5 there for that one. All right, so let me go ahead and put these two side by side here. So here is the, actually, I'll just make it full screen for now. So this is a recipe app, and it's a .NET 7 app, but it actually originally was created, I believe, with .NET 6. And I think Dan Roth is one of the main people that was working on this project here. All right, so one thing that I'm noticing here is I think Dan must be a fan of the light mode here, because this is a very kind of bright website here. But I'm a fan of the dark mode. So I'm going to go through here and start making some changes here. So as I uncomment these, theoretically, it should have actually updated here. So let me just do that one more time with another Control F5. And if that doesn't work, then we'll just do a refresh. Okay, no problem. Let me just modify these. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. I'll just do a refresh in the browser here. Okay, great. So I changed the background color, and I also inverted the logo here. Let's go ahead and go into a recipe here. Also noticing a couple issues. The tags are not appearing correctly, so we have to fix that. The color of this link is pretty small, and then this text is almost unreadable as well. So let's go to that. That's in recipe details. When you're working with .razor files, you can create standalone view components here. And the solution that I'm working with here, we've got the Blazor WebAssembly project, which is the best for you recipes. And then we also have what's called a Razor class library here. And with Razor class libraries, that's a way that you can take all of your components, put them in a specific library project, and then you could share these components across different ASP.NET Core projects, and they don't necessarily have to be limited to Blazor WebAssembly projects. They could be also reused in regular projects, depending on how it's been implemented. And along with that, when you create components, you get a file that ends with .razor. And if you want a .css file that's associated to that particular component, you would just name it, the name of the file, .razor.css, and now all the styling here is particular to that specific component there. All right, so let me bring this back. Let's go ahead and do another refresh. Okay, so these styles have actually been applied automatically, so we can see that that's been fixed, and then now I can see my tags as well. All right, so that was Hot Reload that does that automatic pushing of those styles here. I'll go ahead and collapse this because we're not going to use that one anymore. We've got that. Now let's go ahead and go to the publish experience for this. So I'm going to right click on the Blazor WebAssembly project. I'll select publish here. In this project, I've already created a couple publish profiles. So when you go in here to begin with, you might see a slightly different experience, but we're going to follow the same exact steps here. So let me click new. And then we have a variety of different targets where you can publish this project, but in this case, we'll pick Azure. We're also going to go ahead and pick Azure Static Web Apps, but of course there's other hosting options available on Azure as well, but for Blazor WebAssembly, we're recommending Azure Static Web Apps. So I'm going to go next here, and in this selection here, I can pick an existing Azure Static Web Apps instance to publish to, or I can go ahead and create a new instance here. So let's go ahead and try this create new. All right, this is going to bring us to the portal here. And from here, what I'll do is we can, pick your subscription, your resource group. Yeah, I just create a new resource group, no problem. For the deployment details, you've got 3 options here: GitHub, Azure DevOps, or other. The first 2 options are if you want a CI/CD flow to be configured. And if we have time, I believe Matt might go through the GitHub workflow there. But if you pick these 2, everything happens in the portal. So if you want to do direct publish from Visual Studio, that's where we'll select the other option here. And I don't need to create any tags, so I'll just go directly to review and create. Form. Okay. All right. Just one second here. Okay, let me go ahead and pick one. I'll go ahead and pick this one. Oh, a name. Sorry, I forgot to pick my name there. So best for you, demo 02. I've gone through this a few times getting ready for this presentation. We'll go ahead and create this Azure Static Web App. And this will take a minute to go ahead and get ready and deployed. But this step doesn't usually take that long. Okay, so now we can see that the deployment is complete. So at this point, I'll go ahead and go back to Visual Studio, click refresh here. We created it in that resource group. So it was the 02. So I'll go ahead and click next here. In this case, we've got the publish, direct to publish. This item is disabled at this time, but that's all taken care of in the Azure portal. So now we've got a publish profile that's been created for us, and it just switched over here. I've got 2 existing publish profiles here. At this point, I'll go ahead and click publish. And I want to keep an eye out on this output window. So in this particular build that I'm running, for one reason or another, it's not popping up the authentication page. So I need to copy this and then go ahead and sign in on this page. You shouldn't have to worry about this. It should pop up the correct page and paste in the correct code as well. So let me go ahead and do that here. No thanks on that one. Go ahead and continue there. All right, so now we've been authenticated, and then this kind of pops up again. All right, so how much time do we have? All right, so we've got a couple minutes left here. So let me, as this is happening, let me kind of point out a few things that you might, that you should be aware of. So the first thing is, when publishing from Visual Studio, the environment will be set to preview by default, and Azure Static Web Apps will always have a production environment, but then you can create additional environments there. So when publishing from Visual Studio, you'll get a preview environment. And let me show you how to modify that. So in the Solution Explorer, under Properties, we can see we've got a series of the pub.xml files here, one for each published profile. So I go ahead and click on the demo 02. And then here is the environment name. So here we've selected preview, but let's say after you publish your site to preview and everything's working great, then you can go ahead and switch this to production, do another publish, and then that will go to the production endpoint of the production environment for that Azure Static Web App. Let's see if this one's done yet. Okay, great. All right, that was like really perfect timing over there. All right, and then after it's done with that publish process, it should go ahead and load up the website. And there's also a link on the publish page for that website as well. So that's over here for that. All right, and that is a kind of simple demo of how you can take a Blazor WebAssembly project and then go ahead and submit that to Azure Static Web Apps. So let me do great. Recipe. And I don't know how to spell recipe there, but that's okay. I gave it the 5 stars. All right, I will go back to Matt.
Okay, so the experience of deploying within Visual Studio is cool and everything. That's great. But there comes this point where you're doing more. Maybe you have additional people that are working on your team as well. And so that's where we get into the kind of the leveling up and moving on to using CI/CD and stuff like that. So the other entry point into actually creating a static web app, and I saw some really good questions. I'm going to answer some of those here as well, is here directly in the portal. So same kind of setup. I'll pick a resource group. I won't talk too much about this. I did see somebody ask about the region. This region is a little bit confusing. Your front end will be globally distributed. It's not, this right here is only for your backend. If you see, it's for your functions API and staging environments. It's just for your backend. Your front end is globally distributed. Period. Always. So I've actually taken the recipe app here. I created it's not a fork for a reason, but if you notice, there's nothing in here except the source and stuff like that. And we will connect to that. So 5 is prime. That's me all over the internet if you want to get in touch with me. Recipes, and of course, main. Now, another question that came up was what front ends are supported. And yes, we support all of the most popular front end frameworks. We got you covered. Now I have to remember exactly where this is because it was in source. That's for you recipes. So I'm going to try and copy that. So instead of being in the client, you'll have to, for this one at least, do this. If you have a functions backend, you can specify where that location is, or you can just leave this empty. That's cool. And review and create. So I actually have this running somewhere else so that we don't have to wait for this to build, but I do want to show you exactly what happens. Same screen. Okay, the resource is done. Now let's go back over to our repo. And now you'll notice that I have this commit on my behalf for adding CI/CD. And what this workflow does is creates these build runs. Actually, let me go into the YAML file. You can see exactly what's happening. So on these specific events, it's going to run the build and deploy for static web apps. It's created some secrets in the repo. That is similar to how we create the publish profile in VS. All that stuff is created for you behind the scenes. And if we go into actions, we will see that this app is currently being deployed. There we go. This is all real-time build and stuff like that. It takes a few minutes, so I'm going to switch over to a different repo, which is here. So this is the exact same one that Syed was just demoing. You can see last week I prepared this and ran the actual build and deploy job. But the other thing that I wanted to show off is I mentioned the staging environment situation. And the way that works is I created a branch. I just called it attribution. And I did something I knew was actually going to break this. I just changed one file. And I added a little TM in the name. The name is actually used to pull the images. And you'll see that what happens is there's a build that's run. So the static web app CI CD build deploy. And if I go back over into my static web apps and I look for that one, I now have two environments. So my main environment is my WASM branch, which I can browse to and everything is cool. That's just the default main branch. But that attribution pull request automatically created a totally separate environment. And I can browse to that one. And you'll see that where I added my TM, it actually broke. So I can test this. This also, I mentioned the region piece that you pick up from front. This is where your staging environments will be as well. So this one's in central US. So your staging environments will be region locked, for lack of a better term. But yeah, so at this point, once I have corrected the issue and I merge the pull requests, that will kick off a new build and deployment to the production environment. And everything's good to go. This is probably, like I said, one of my favorite things about this. You can make sure things are running. You can use that as you review the actual PR and ask for changes back, that kind of thing. We have just a few more minutes, so I kind of wanted to jump into the Q&A. I know there were a couple of other questions that I didn't cover.
I saw a question about what is a static web app. I wonder if we can address that one. So Yeah, so let's compare a static web app versus like a typical ASP.NET MVC project. With ASP.NET MVC, those are basically server rendered, right? So you'll send a request, the server will get the request, and then it will actually process that request and then generate the HTML response that will be sent out. Now, with a static website or with a static web app, there is no server-side processing there, right? Literally what's happening is they're just files being transferred over the wire. So, imagine the internet like 10 or 15 years ago, or maybe even more, where there was no server-side frameworks and they're just files sitting on servers. So that's what a static web app is. And maybe Matt has more to add to that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so there are a couple of other names that people are using for patterns. One I see becoming popular now is like the mock pattern. There's also the Jamstack. It's really about your front end is built. It is static. The files that are actually there in your app are static. All of the processing and runtime rendering stuff happens in the browser, in your customer's browser, that kind of stuff. And if you notice in the agenda item, or in the why static web apps, I didn't want to use the word static. Instead, I used the term modern web apps. So it's all about these modern front end frameworks. React, Vue is my favorite. Angular, those things where they're single page apps, right? You're rendering in the browser, that kind of thing. It goes beyond that though, with the serverless backend just kind of built in. But yeah, I would like to call it something else just between us. I mean, just between all of us that are watching this right now. Yeah, because now we also support the SSR server-side rendering with things like Next.js and stuff like that. So static has gotten to be a really heavy name, and yeah.
There's also a great video posted by James Montemagno, why to use static web apps, also on the Azure developers channel. And so I've linked that in the comment section as well, just in case you would like to learn more about that. In addition, Matt and the static web apps team also has their community live streams. So y'all are the fourth Thursday at 9 a.m., I believe. The next one being April 27th to learn more.
Yeah, I did create a link and it has some of that content. It's I don't know where to put it to make it show up on the screen. I'll throw it in this other chat.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat and I'll make sure. There we go. I can get that up there.
But I did put together a list of links. It does include like the This Month in SWA that links out to the community stand up and stuff like that. Yeah, and like I said, I'm 5S Prime everywhere on the internet. Like, you're welcome. DMs are open everywhere. And I did see a question from Za. As soon as we commit and push code changes to the repo, GitHub's workflow kicks in and updates the website. Yes, absolutely. And that YAML file, that GitHub workflow file, you can add other stuff to that as well. So if you have CI or unit tests that you want to run for the CI portion of it, you can npm tests if you're a Node person like me, or whatever it is for other frameworks as part of that as well.
And you can also configure that. The way that it comes out of the box is really like a CI/CD type of flow. So every commit will then get pushed to that preview environment. But you can modify those files to push from particular branches or have certain safeguards and whatnot. Yeah.
Oh, there's another really good question. Yes, thank you so much for putting that up there. There are no APIs or databases used with static web apps, kind of. So what we've tried to accomplish with static web apps is as little API as you actually need. So for example, if you are just serving like an API that wraps your database, you actually don't need to implement that. So like me personally, I would go and create an Express app that would just make calls over to the database with Mongoose or something. You don't actually have to do that anymore. You can just go into the portal for your app, go to database connections, link your database, and you just magically have an API that accesses that data. Again, the built-in auth and authorization, you can set that for the routes for that data. It's both REST and GraphQL as well. So if you're using React and you want to use GraphQL queries, that's all in there. Yeah, and then of course, like the APIs are not limited to the serverless piece. You can always point to an app service instance or a container app instance. I think there are others, but those are the two that are the main ones that people use.
Yeah. And then on top of the built-in capabilities that Azure Static Web Apps has, when you're building a Blazor WebAssembly project, even though even though these files will be served in a static fashion, you can still write C# because what's happening is we've got that WASM component that comes in, and that will bring you the .NET framework, and then everything is just run inside the browser there.
Great. What a way to end the day. This was such a great session and great questions. Loved hearing all of your thoughts.
Thank you for having us here.
Yeah, thanks.